Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us here. This week, Bill and Jim were the guests on Greg Hunter's USA Watchdog website, and if you have not seen or listened to that interview, I would really encourage you to take the time at usawatchdog.com to listen to it. It was a great perspective and certainly well developed. Dave and Jim and Bill are all on the call with me. My name's Denny, and a few years ago I read a book, or sort of very quickly went through a book called The Quickening. And I believe we're all living through a quickening of sorts right now. The financial markets are hitting all-time highs, and at the same time, the economy seems to be dawdling or just doing something different. It's sputtering in some parts, it's improving in others, but certainly it's not hitting all-time highs in the economy. The farmers here in the Midwest just can't seem to catch a break. About the only thing, we're haying here on the farm today, and it's about the only crop that's going to be bountiful, and it's because of all the rain. Well, this week, Bill got a lot of questions from listeners, and he sent several of them to me to build up the dialogue for today. So today, although I can't speak for all the listeners, it appears to me that a lot of the listeners are just trying to take what they are hearing from Bill and Dave and Jim and figure out what the consequences are going to be in their daily lives. And we've been talking at higher levels for so many weeks, and I think that's where we're going to start today, is to drill right down to it for what it means to listeners in their personal lives. So Jim, Bill, and Dave, that's where we're going to go. Let's get the questions going right now. Jim, the first question comes from Tom on the West Coast, and it's about comments we hear from you every so often about the term trillionaires. And Tom says, the Forbes list of richest show the top person in the world with a net worth of about $100 billion, which is a tenth of a trillion. So Tom says, Jim, without giving any names, can you offer some insight about this rarefied group of people that you call trillionaires and speak to how they remain so entirely discreet?
The key to it, Tom, is what you said at the end of your question, that they remain so discreet. I once said to my father, who we were on a first-name basis in business, I said, Bert, I know who you're partners with. I know the things you've done. How come I've never read a book about you? And he said, it's very simple. He said, I'm not so stupid as to open my mouth. He had the same opinion about life in a way as does David. Know everything you have to know, and hope nobody, and work towards nobody knowing you. I have a man working for me in South Africa who prides himself in being almost a ghost for pretty much the same reason. He understands what's coming. He's doing fabulous work, fabulous things, but there's no book about him. We've got Uli Roth, who's built 7 mines, 6 of which are still building. One was a $2 billion mine, and you don't see his name on the front page of the New York Times. It used to be a big thing to make $100,000. I can remember as a kid that if I felt I could ever meet that mark at 6%, I was made. Okay, or whatever the rate would, above 5%. Things were a little cheaper back then. If you take a look at the size of the over-the-counter derivative market, a quadrillion, and look at the size of debt, which is just off the charts. Think about the money that's missing from the Defense Department. If 22 trillion has gone missing, you don't think somebody has 1/22 of that? Of course, you're absolutely right, Tom. Trillionaires are not falling out of the closet all over the place. But Forbes is yesterday, not the magazine. Fortune is yesterday, and they get their information from public sources. And the last thing a person does who is as fortunate as to run a dynasty is to not let people know the real size of what it is. Just think for a moment what the accounting plug of the Department of Defense. And you know somebody's got a quarter of that, a half of that, 1/22nd of that. And you won't question for a moment that the 1% now has its own 1%. And those trillionaires do exist, and they exist in the industry of war, and they exist in the industry of crime. So bankers, war, crime, and pedophilia. That's where you find them. I hope that answers your question, Tom.
Good job, Jim. Bill, the next question comes from Paul, and he mentioned our call of a couple weeks ago where you and Jim were talking rather matter-of-factly about where to park money. And Jim had I'm going to brag on you, Jim. It was a brilliant dissertation about how many grams of gold would it take to maintain your lifestyle. And you talked in terms of grams of gold, not dollars. Now, here in the States, we think in terms of ounces and not grams, so we're all trying to do those gyrations in our brain. But in that same segment, Bill chimed in about where to park your wealth for safety. Bill, if somebody needs $3,000 a month in today's dollars in purchasing power parity to live comfortably for 10 to 20 years, how would one make this happen with precious metals? How would you coach them to do that, Bill?
Oh, okay. Yeah, you would purchase either gold or silver. You can hold it yourself, or you can have it stored in a private non-bank vault, and then once a month liquidate. Liquidate for $3,000.
That would be in communication with whoever the depository was, and you just say, send me a check, or...
So you use, let's say that I brokered it, and it's stored in a non-bank vault. They would contact me, say, Bill, I need $3,000. I'd call the order in, and they'd have a wire 2 business days later, or a check probably 4 business days later because of the mail, time that it takes to go through the mail. The logistics of that is really easy. That's not...
Transaction costs are expensive or not?
Actually, if you purchase metal, I clear all my business through Miles Franklin. If you purchase metal through Miles Franklin, they don't charge a commission on the way out.
You guys have reminded me, I owe my dentist 2 ounces, and I haven't paid him because, I've been very much involved in the other thing. So after this call is over, I've got to give him a call and say, come on over, and I'll give you your 2 ounces but I'll have to give them a time because they are stored very well that close to me.
I wouldn't want to mess with your dogs, Jim.
I was just about to say, I'm sure there's a big dog sitting...
Holy crap, those are big dogs.
Yeah. You know the one, the junkyard guard dog.
Dave.
But the closer it is, the better it is. It's a savings account. It's money. I use grams because it was I was using the real historical experience of how Weimar did a reset.
Well, we'll talk. There's a question coming up about that from Catherine, and we'll talk about that one. The question I think we have is that if it's in storage, and you know what 3,000 is as far as grams, if you call the people that are storing, if I call you, Bill, and I say, Bill, I need $3,000,
we'll do the
they
math.
Will liquidate on
we'll
book.
Do the math, and we'll liquidate
whatever
brings it up to $3,000.
Okay, I think I got this. David, Paul, the guy that came up with this question about how do you park the money, also had another question about a good book. He was wanting to learn more about what took place in the Weimar Republic. Jim just mentioned that with certain things, how mortgages were reset to grams of gold at the time a mortgage was granted. So Paul's question, and the question really on everybody's mind is, why don't I just buy gold and silver and wait for it to go up and then convert it back to dollars to pay my mortgage? How would you point somebody to learn more about really what happened economically, or what type of advice would you give them as far as paying off a mortgage or waiting to pay it off in what they hope is going to be less value?
Well, again, Jim has been pretty clear on this, that there is a possibility that your mortgage gets rewritten based on the new values that may be presented at the time of the reset. So if they're hoping to, okay, let me take a simple example. I own a house that's worth $400,000. I take an equity credit line and pull the $400,000 out and hope the $400,000 that I purchase in gold doubles in price. Then I could pay my mortgage off at a later date and still have half of the gold. It's a high risk.
That's exactly the scenario that everybody's thinking of in their own mind, Dave.
Yeah, that's a hard play to make. Don't think I haven't thought about this. I've been doing this for 20 years, and it's not a safe play. I would not call that a safe play. That is a risky bet. There's a lot of things that can go wrong along the way. So, I would rather defer to Jim on an explanation on how, during the Germany reset, your mortgages were also reset. Jim, you've actually told me a couple stories about this. You want to pick that up for a second?
Sure. We've said for such a long time that we've bored people. Now they're starting to see that we've taught them, and the basic idea that the bank gets screwed is wrong. In almost every situation in history, and every major financial problem in history, somehow the depositors have been screwed, but the bank hasn't.
Jim, hold up just a sec. Jim, hold just a second, because Catherine another listener, Catherine, tied into Paul's question. Let me give you the scenario she just gave me. She said, suppose I have a $3 million mortgage and the price of gold at the inception was $500 an ounce. So if I have 6,000 ounces of gold at the mortgage, that's what I would pay back. So if Jim's right and gold goes to 50,000, then I'm only going to need 60 coins to pay off my $3 million mortgage. And, at 14, she does another calculation. So can you discuss about whether Catherine, in this case, is going to need 6,000 ounces of gold or 60 ounces of gold if gold goes to 50,000? That's what our listeners are thinking through.
Okay. If that's the bottom line, then the answer is, as it occurred in Weimar, and as it may occur again as people search the true history of events, the mortgage you have won't be a $500,000 or $50,000 mortgage. The mortgage you have will be calculated in grams of gold at the point in time of the making of the mortgage itself on such and such a day. And the price of gold will be taken at that time, and instead of owing $50,000 on the house, you'll owe the equivalent rise in gold times the $50,000.
But there is a window, Jim, where people will be able to pay the mortgage down before that trigger's pulled.
Well, we're saying, for goodness sakes, don't buy gold if on debt. Okay?
Right.
No mortgage man. I've spent so many years working to avoid the margin man by having a debtless deposit of gold of world-class size without anybody on it to force me to act, or anybody I need to satisfy. That was my goal. Biggest mountain of gold.
Say that if you have the equivalent amount of gold equal to your mortgage today, you'll be okay. You'll be able to pay your mortgage off.
Oh, yeah.
And there will be a window between now and when they actually pull the trigger on legislation. There will be a window where gold has risen. You could pay your mortgage off and not use all of your gold.
We would hope so, Bill. Okay, but maybe somebody would study the history of what they're about to do, and realize that a reset is necessary in various and different contracts involving the banking industry or their industry as it stands.
Catherine, if I understand what these guys have said, is the reality is if you have a $3 million mortgage at $500 an ounce at the time of inception, it's going to take 6,000 ounces. But if I heard Bill correctly, you'll have a little bit of a window. It's like staying on the train and knowing when to jump off. But it's kind of dicey, and what Jim is saying through wisdom is just be really, really careful. Don't ever buy gold with borrowed money. But did I say that right, Bill?
Yes.
All right. Keep those questions coming.
Bill Holter's point about selling gold for what? What if you sell gold, you've got to answer the question: what am I getting on the other side? And do I in fact want whatever will be the coin of the realm?
Yeah,
right,
and one of those
gold,
might
where would you put it? The only thing you would use it for is to extinguish debt.
Oh, I personally think we're not going to sell our gold. Okay, I don't. Yeah. I think we're in everything that we've discussed. We are in the beginning of the scenario of the extreme, and I think that now that has begun, there is a possibility that as you see things develop, and you're fortunate enough to have your gold and access to it, you may decide that this is not a trade, okay? This is your savings account. So what you're saying is, when do I dump my savings account? A bit of a contradiction in terms. I anticipate not selling gold, regardless of whether I mine it or have it in a mayonnaise jar. I have no
Jim,
intention
that is one of the listeners' questions this week. He says Jim has repeatedly said that when a miner brings up gold through the first stage of refining, the miner should never sell the gold until it's fairly valued. So the listener, and very rightly so, he says, well, so how do you make payrolls? If you're not selling what you're bringing up, how do you have money? And I think they figured it out.
Your refiner becomes a very special kind of bank, and I'm also have the knowledge of a seasoned, accomplished trader, and trading from the long side is so easy to do. My dogs could do it. I never had a margin call when I was long 22,000 COMEX contracts, and that's back in the early 70s. So if you can handle that, you can handle anything. The bottom line for me is, because I intend to play this in a very big way, is to borrow from Harris in Zurich what I need to keep the lights on and deliver and all my gold, and make strategic trades against the long side, which, by the way, is the easiest thing in the whole world. Every time the price of gold goes into a major rhino horn, as it would look on a chart, you sell some. And every time gold comes down into what looks like a waterfall, you buy some. You can apply that from owning 1 ounce to owning $1 trillion worth of gold. And as you do that, you mark down the cost of your position. You mark your profit. You take your profit. Let's say your position cost you $10, and you made $1 in the transaction. Your position now cost you $9. That game has one goal. Your position in gold should cost you no dollars, or as in reverse interest rates, negative interest rates, you should have a negative cost on your gold. And if the questionnaire or anybody listening would just trade exactly as I've just said, and be extremely disciplined, they're going to do it. They're going to do very, very well. But they must bear in mind that gold is not a trading item. Gold is your savings account. And I haven't heard anybody that will take a 1-year paper position on their savings account. So what we're in now, we are in it. It is happening. Okay, this is not a run up to it. All of that's taken place. We are dead set in the midst of a significant move in the price of gold to absolutely no less than its all-time high, and very much in excess of it, for reasons that are logical and not conspiratorial. We're in a world that we'll discuss as we go on, in which some very, very scary things have recently happened.
Jim, let me do a little bit deeper dive on this, because what is on the macro scale is also on the micro, and I'm going to use a gold mine as the macro. Let's say you mine 100,000 ounces of gold. The price of gold is $2,000 an ounce, so you've got, $2 million? Did I get that right? $2 billion worth of gold.
You have a cost of production, too.
You have a cost of production. We'll subtract that off, but you're just going to keep that gold in the bank, and then if you need something for payroll, to keep the lights on, to buy diesel fuel, to do all the different things, you borrow on what you got on the bank. You don't sell it, because carrying the debt is cheaper because the price of gold is going up. Have I nailed it?
You've nailed it with the fact that even in that scenario, there will be a need for some controlled selling. Because you can't let a position get out of hand. So according to what you can sell in the world markets for gold at that time, you'd have to liquidate some of that. But my belief is that the price of gold will be set by China and set by Russia through all the machinations that we've discussed, through multiple resets which we've discussed. And I talked about calling up the trader in China and asking him what's his bid and offer, and having him answer me with one number. Let's go 50,000. And calling up a trader in New York and asking what's his market. He says a single figure, 50,000. Gold thereby, without any convertibility, is set at 50,000. That's how the price of gold will eventually get set. And in all probability, the wisest thing to do is just be happy that you've made a ton and stay with what you have. We don't have to catch up. There's no high to catch this time, okay? We're not out there to nail 1918 or 1921. What we're out there to do is nail time, not price.
If I'm reading all the listeners' questions, and if I'm reading them correctly, the mindset is we'll convert them to dollars because we understand dollars as well. But the lesson here, and Bill, I'll come right to you. Charlie sent in this question
about the lesson.
Yeah, Charlie sent in this question about potentially conflicting situation about the debt jubilee. If the debt jubilee happens, that is to say that the debt is forgiven, why do gold and silver adjust to a value arrived at that current date and claimed in gold? In other words, if the debt is forgiven, what causes gold and silver to raise to a higher value, and what do I do with that when it raises to a higher value? What do I convert to?
Well,
and you're saying...
For one thing, gold and silver are real money. They'd basically be the only monies left, because all monies today are based on debt. So if there were a jubilee, that means you're also jubileeing the cash. So something has to absorb the value or accrue the value. and that would be gold and silver. Now, we've talked about this before regarding Jubilee. Remember, debt is not only a liability, so the monkey's off the borrower's back, it's also an asset. So on the asset side of the ledger, you're going to see some zeroing out, and that includes pensions, that includes insurance companies, that includes bank balance sheets. So you can't look at it from one side and say, oh, well, if we have a Jubilee, that means there's no more student loans, there's no more car loans, there's no more this, there's no more that, because there is another side to it. There's no more assets either. Now, as far as gold and silver, you could see $50,000 gold, but you could also see a cup of coffee at $50 or $100.
You will see.
Right. So, but my point being, gold and silver will gain in their purchasing power, but it's not like gold's going to go to $50,000 an ounce, and you can still buy a cup of coffee at Starbucks for $3.
An additional
Bill,
question that Charlie...
Even saying buying a cup of coffee at Starbucks for $3 is another oxymoron. Coffee's not worth $3.
Let me finish on what I think Charlie's intent of his question was. He understands that each event individually, if he visions them in his mind. What he's not sure is, are they happening simultaneously or one after another? In other words, if we have debt jubilee, does gold and silver spike? Or if gold and silver spike, will we have debt jubilee? Are they simultaneous, Bill, or are they non-correlative?
Actually, I'm surprised that someone would think that a human being would actually have that answer. I mean, how can you know?
Well, that's how much they respect you guys. I
get it, but that's
yeah.
You know.
I would say if I had to answer, you had a 45 911 model, and if I didn't answer, there was going to be a big bang. My answer would be simultaneously, because I see that event tied with the failure to deliver gold, and therefore no physical gold.
And created by an event.
And created by an event, or part of the creation of a large overall event. And the price goes then to whomever is the physical market maker with the largest inventory, prepared to trade with the public or a sovereign without regard. And this is why we go back to gold is not an investment by China. Gold is not an investment by Russia, but rather gold is a long-term strategy for building the foundation of the Silk Road. So as the economy moves to the Silk Road, it's going to ride on the back of a very different gold market with very different owners and countries that today are not relevant or not considered as relevant, such as Russia, will gain a great deal of relevancy because of that strategy. And they will basically be the makers of the gold market. So the price will be whatever price they choose it will be. And there's no way to stop them. In other words, unless you've got the physical gold, what are you going to sell? So that's the day the hand in poker is called. The United States, you got $8 billion? Good. Sell it to me, please. We talk ounces. We don't talk your currency.
So if we're talking triggering events and everything happens sort of simultaneously, Dave, this week Deutsche Bank announced layoffs, that they were closing down their trading operations, and it sounds from the public relations side, and it's probably not the case, but from the public relations side, it sounds like they want to get back to the knitting of just being a good German bank. Dave, I don't even see how this is going to be possible. They're so deeply entrenched in the derivatives and trading. How in the name of big goodness can they get out? Can this, or do you think this might be a triggering event with Deutsche Bank backing out?
You know, you never know, Denny. Again, could this be a Lehman Brothers times 2? Yes, it's definitely possible because everybody's so interconnected at this stage of the game. You know, we don't really know for sure what's going on behind the scenes. So it's going to be really hard, and this is, again, why borrowing money to buy gold is difficult because there's always something that we don't know. You know, when I say we don't know, everything's fluid. And when I say fluid, what you thought was going to happen today when you thought about it might not be when you look at it on Wednesday what's going to happen. So, you know, how this shakes out with the banks here, it's going to be hard to tell because the banks have acted poorly ever since Deutsche Bank has had trouble. So, again, it could be over a weekend event. We don't really know. And, again, that's why it's hard to, you know, to use borrowed money to buy gold because when you wake up on Monday or Tuesday, you really don't know what's going to be happening. You know, anything could happen. You know, a nuclear bomb could go off. You know, take the Russian scenario that you asked me about last week. If you listen to the Russians' side of that, they averted a planetary catastrophe. Now, think about that. You know, is that factored into anybody's game plan? You know, I don't know what the catastrophe might have been, but when you start talking on scales like that, what you're thinking about or what I'm thinking about on this Saturday may not be what is really going to happen, you know, in the middle of the week. So, you know, again, that's a really hard one to answer about the bank. That's in the category of we know it's in danger. Let's wait and see and try and be as protected as we can be. I hope that helps.
That's a good job. I keep trying to find these.
It may not. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right, Jim. Go ahead.
It may not be in any form that we've already mentally prepared and designed our actions for, but it will be in one form that will be undeniable. And that is that the price of gold will rise and the value of the U.S. currency will fall dramatically. And there'll be further risk to the currency on the downside, and there'll be further risk for gold on the upside. I'd say to the listener, Charlie, this is the one you want. This is your keeper, okay? I've got plans of what would be necessary if all of a sudden development funds were required for the mine, which required some fancy sharing of the gold for a person who had no intention of selling the gold. And I've already sat down with every scenario possible, and I have a plan for all of it. But we don't know which of that's going to happen. And what Bill is saying is, you have a basic plan where gold is a savings account, not a trading mechanism. Therefore, you're not chasing a price, and therefore the probability is you need to know any high price as the market as we know it will be much different. And with China and Russia as the primary actors in that market, I wouldn't worry too much about a decline.
Bill, this week you had an article posted, I think it came from Zero Hedge, but I'm not sure, about the whale in the silver markets.
Yep.
The intelligent questions that are coming through, a lot of people are seeing, is this a triggering event? And you know, just like Deutsche Bank that I asked Dave about, can you expand on the situation and let listeners know what the evidence is pointing to as far as the large traders in the silver markets and what might happen should their position be manifested? I mean, sort of play out what the big whale in the silver markets might be doing.
Well, I think this goes back to what we've been posting, the writing by Jay Johnson each day, and he's talked about the long-term and huge size of long-term out-of-the-money call options on silver to the tune of literally a billion or more ounces, which is not deliverable. I think what I took from that article is that there is a big trader out there that has turned on the herd of big traders. There's 8 of them. And it looks like one of them or a new player, my suspicion is it's probably J.P. Morgan, but there's not a way to know, is that they've turned and basically are digging a hole in the ground, digging their heels in, and at some point they're going to demand delivery. And
what I had also heard, it was J.P. Morgan on behalf of our China friends.
It very well could be. But I believe it's not about making dollars. It's about sweeping up whatever availability of physical metal there is, and then the system changes. I do want to add, Jim, we got a question regarding our interview with Greg Hunter when we were talking about the dollar index. You could see it back down to the 56, 58 level, and the person who asked the question was saying, how is that possible? That would mean that the dollar would have to fall versus the euro, versus the yen, versus the pound, versus the yuan. And I answered the question by asking them, if you go back, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, or actually a little more, I guess 5 years ago, when the dollar index was at 72, the question could have been asked, how in the world could the dollar possibly go to par? So the reason I put it that way was going to par was like an impossibility. And this reader is thinking that going to 56 is an impossibility. All currencies are going to burn down. All fiat currencies are going to burn down. So you could see gold in all currencies quadruple and nothing move. Or you could see gold in all currencies double but quadruple in dollars because the dollar went from 97 to 56. Jim, can you imagine a scenario where the dollar drops to 56 on the USDX?
The basis for the re-election.
The loss of reserve currency. That was my suggestion.
Well, that is definitely true, and that is definitely happening or happened, whichever way you want to take a look at, because the dollar has lost its 3 standards and has no standard behind it at the present time. But America remains the leading influence in world economics, and catch the operating word, influence, not activity, influence. China's ahead of us. And with that influence, bear in mind that to get reelected now, this administration will eventually have to go to fiscal stimulation, because the ability to do their previous interventions has required a tremendous appetite for buying U.S. bonds, which really have been bought by the U.S. Treasury via Belgium and Grand Cayman. But the game to do that is sort of running out of steam unless you do one thing: sacrifice the dollar. And in other words, if you're going to buy your own bonds, to infinity, and you have some idea that that's going to strengthen the U.S. dollar, it would have the contrary effect. It would weaken the U.S. dollar in terms of all other currencies. I can see a political situation where there's a mad rush to build a $16 lane highway from New York City to San Francisco and fix every pothole there is in the world. Because we can't, this situation is deteriorating. In all probability, by Election Day on 2020, it will be totally and completely obvious that the situation has turned, if there is not some form of stimulation, and that is the answer to how the U.S. dollar could decline against all other currencies, because debt monetization now, the true word that should be used for QE, is QE to infinity, which means it's debt monetization to infinity. And all one need do is go into any economic encyclopedia on their computer and ask for a definition of what is debt monetization, and historically what has been the effect of debt monetization, and then add to infinity. That's your answer. That's how it could happen.
All right, I'm going to turn this aircraft carrier 90 degrees, and I still want to get, I've got one more question from Randy, but I've got Steve, Paul, Charlie, and Catherine all covered. But Dave, we've heard stories for years about how the deep state and the whole political atmosphere is one of blackmail and corruption. It is estimated that literally 90% of those in power have deep secrets and scandals that somebody else is using as leverage against them. There are even rumors that Chief Justice John Roberts has gone out of character of his past judicial opinions to totally surprise everybody by coming down in support of political machine or the deep state. It all seems like total chaos. Now we hear that Jeffrey Epstein has been arrested and has some secrets and dirt on hundreds, if not thousands, of political and powerful people. Dave, this seems like total chaos is about to break loose. And one of the listeners just said, what's Dave think about this? So, Dave, there it is, a big softball coming at you. Take a swing. What could be the result of the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, before we go there, what you have to do is you have to look at history. And I don't know how many of the listeners have been involved in this for a very long time, but let's just start with the Kennedy assassination. There's so many questions there that haven't been answered. When our present president came into office, he swore he was going to release all the CIA records regarding the Kennedy assassination. And I said, oh, my God, if that was to happen, it would blow the lid off a lot of things. It didn't happen. There was a big pedophile scandal back in your neck of the woods, Dave. I believe it was in Omaha, and it was called the Franklin pedophile scandal. And it involved little boys and the Republicans, and everybody swore that was going to blow the doors off of everything. A bunch of people died, went missing. You know what happened? Nothing. Then there was a D.C. Madam scandal. This woman had the book on everybody, from Dick Cheney to generals to Pentagon officials. She had dirt on everybody. Everybody thought for sure we were going to blow this wide open. She swore she would never commit suicide. She was going to see this to the end. They found her in her mother's backyard hanging from a nylon rope. England had a giant pedophile scandal. Giant. I mean, it reached all the way to the King and Queen of England. Jimmy Savile, it was all over the place. You know what happened? Nothing. So, before I jump to conclusions and say, oh, this is it, is it really going to happen this time? I have to look at how history has played out in the last 60 years. And what I've seen is people who are in charge, whether you want to call it the military-industrial complex, the banking complex, they are in charge. They seem to stay in charge. Once in a while, the public gets a piece of red meat, and like alligators, they're all chomping at the bit. But at the end of the day, the people in charge are not stupid. They are not easily going to be dislodged. because the systems that we think about, like the central banks, they're so entrenched that should, as we said last week.
Hey, Dave, you need to tip your head or something. You're cutting in and out.
You know, I've been hearing that also when you guys are talking. So, you know, I don't know what's causing that because I am stationary and not moving. But, Benny, the point I'm getting at is we can't call anything for certain. We have to wait and see how everything plays out. Because the things that we're talking about would upset the nation and would create a crisis in confidence. And a crisis of confidence could cause the total collapse of systems that are necessary to keep the system functioning. Similar to if the central bank ceased to exist, our systems would no longer function. So I can't answer that question. The only thing I could look at is history and say, over the last 50 years, there's been several times we've been what could be called right on the edge, and somehow the people in charge still maintain control. So I, for one, I'm just sitting back with my bowl of popcorn watching to see what happens, and I can't make predictions at this stage of the game.
Dave, that was incredibly wise. That's a perspective that I think the listeners can really appreciate. Don't jump to conclusions. Let's wait and see what they do. Hey, Bill, this week I talked to you a little bit about what was going on in the numismatic world as far as gold.
Yep.
For instance, the St. Gaudens $20 gold pieces, these are the pieces that go back to the early 1900s. They
all the
seem to be so...
1850.
Yeah, but they're so very cheap compared to today's 1-ounce coins. And I even heard rumors, and I called you, that the numismatists have just sort of given up and maybe even not just flooding the markets with high-quality St. Gaudens coins, but they might even be melting them down. What's going on the numismatic side, and how long can it last?
I think we've already hit bottom. We probably hit the bottom as far as premiums were concerned a month, maybe 6 weeks ago. We got to the point where you could buy an MS-62 Liberty for exactly the same price as a Gold Eagle. And premiums on all coins, pretty much all silver coins, all gold coins, premiums have begun to evaporate. And I mentioned really since the third, fourth quarter of last year and then into this year, we have seen, I don't want to say on balance selling, but a typical market, you get 9 buyers for every 1 seller. That's just a normal market. And I'm going to say over the last 6 to 9 months, we've had 4 sellers for every 6 buyers. So the dealers were just getting absolutely filled up with inventory. So naturally, they're going to lower the price and continually lower the price versus spot because they only have so much capital that they can commit. So it got to the point where circulated Liberties, circulated St. Gaudens, they were trading almost at spot. So there was absolutely zero premium for the historical value. And
here's a perspective that I want to share with you. It used to be said, and of course I'm putting demographics probably where I shouldn't be, that the holders of the old numismatics, the St. Gaudens, the $20 gold piece, their age group was 80 plus because that was coins that they remembered from their parents and they held them.
Okay.
Now, if what Jim and you are saying is that generation is now living off of their bank, which just happens to be numismatic gold, it could be that is the liquidation to maintain lifestyle from that generation.
Only a small part, Denny. That's not.
Yeah.
That's minor.
Okay.
And you're not watching full hordes being sold by people 80 years old. You may have 10 coins at a time. You're not going to see, 500 coins or 1,000 coins from an 85-year-old, unless they pass away and the kids want to sell it all. I can tell you, in the numismatics, there was back in January, February, March, there was a couple of quite sizable tranches of U.S. coin that were sold. So a good a couple of whacks into the market did come from Europe, and who knows what was behind it, whether it was an asset change position, whether it was a patriarch of a family or two families passed away and it was divvied up and the heirs decided to sell. I don't know, but I do know that there was a couple of big tranches that came out of Europe.
Thanks, Ben. Dave, this next question comes from a listener, Randy, and we were sort of talking about this ahead of the call. The biggest story not covered in media was Turkey's buying of the S-400 missile defense system from Russia. Now, two things here. Turkey was NATO, and the S-400 is the most modern. It's not the older S-300. This is a big deal. The Turks didn't. The Turks don't look like loyal NATO members anymore.
Did they ever?
Well, Ken, let's cover that. A loyal NATO member. There was a coup attempt in Turkey very recently that an individual in the United States named Gulian was allegedly behind. Gulian is allegedly a CIA asset. He runs madrasas all over the country and the world. So, you have to question, what good is NATO if it's trying to overthrow one of its own? So Turkey's doing, as we said a long time ago, every country's going to have to cover their own butt. At the end of the day, the United States can jump up and down and yell and holler, but at the end of the day, each individual country has to figure out how it is going to survive. Turkey right now has made the decision that for it to survive, because again, I believe the United States was behind the attempted coup against Turkey. I believe that Russia, specifically Vladimir Putin, called Turkey President Erdogan and told him, you have minutes to get out of the palace or you're dead. That was a turning point in Turkey and NATO's relationship. Turkey came to the conclusion that it was going to be overthrown. Erdogan was going to be overthrown. The United States was going to install a puppet military government that was going to do what the United States wanted. That failed. That pushed Erdogan into Russia's hands, for lack of a better word. So yes, that is a huge deal. This is huge. And it definitely changes the whole makeup of NATO, because Turkey provides one of the largest standing militaries outside of the United States in NATO, larger than Germany, larger than France. So as we look at these events taking place, this is why I said earlier about buying gold, mortgaging your house to buy gold. We don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. You never know what tomorrow's going to bring. We never thought you could have quantitative easing to the point that you would have negative interest rates. Nobody ever factored that in. So, yes, this is a very big deal, and again, this is one of those, rather than guess what it means going forward, it's a major event. You need to keep your eyes on that ball and watch how it evolves, because it is what we would call a liquid situation, very fluid. I hope that gives people
Well, hey, David, from my point of view, the biggest thing there is now Turkey's got a bargaining chip. I mean, a very powerful bargaining chip.
Well, see, if they used our Patriot missile system, well, we don't know that they could protect themselves from an attack from Israel. They now could protect themselves from attack, I would say, from anybody except Russia, because Russia may have a backdoor into their own S-400.
Right.
I would be surprised if they did not. And that's why everybody's afraid to buy American weapons. And you buy American weapons, how do you know we can't turn the Patriot missile battery off when we attack you?
Yes.
Now this is a game changer. This is an absolute game changer for NATO. You know, the European Union didn't let Turkey in. You know, they kept them at arm's length. Well, there's consequences for that, and I think we just saw it because, as you said earlier, Bill, the first components of the S-400 have been delivered.
Yes.
Have been delivered. They're there. The jet landed. They've unloaded them. This deal sure looks like it's going through. Game changer, absolutely.
Before I give Jim the last question, I do want to give my thanks to Steve and Paul and Charlie and Catherine and then Randy, who sent in this last question about Turkey. Guys, thanks. So many times we try to guess what listeners want to know and learn and understand. So your questions help us get back to the rudimentary portions that we assume a lot of people already know. So, Jim, last question for you. About a dozen years ago, I went to a conference and I heard a very reputable speaker, somebody who has been around long enough that I just appreciated his opinion. And his statement was, and this was like 2003, it was after 9/11, so it's about 2003, he said, if we can survive the political and social chaos that's coming at us, we're going to have a pretty great country a little after 2020. Now, I think he was a little bit premature. So I got two questions. Can we survive the political and social chaos that is still coming at us? And what will a post-second reset United States look like to you? So first of all, can we survive it? And after the second reset that you talk about, what's the United States going to look like?
Our ability to survive the oncoming situation is inherently answered by the size of global debt. The answer back in 2000 was maybe. The answer as we stand in front of 2020 is a very weak maybe. We shouldn't rule out the eternal bravery and great history of our country and people who have died for principle and liberty and freedom. So I sure hope we can. In a hard, cold analysis, Bill has shown the size of the world debt as being non-sustainable and not repayable. I tend to think Bill is correct, in which case I'd say that paper representing the United States, such as its sovereign bonds, are not the best investment in the world. When you say survive means to me living life tomorrow the same way you lived it today. And the answer to that is absolutely no. So I hope that covers all aspects of the question.
You're a good one, Jim. So many people dial into these calls just trying to draw on the wisdom of you three guys. So thanks for all you share. I will point out to the listeners that if you have specific questions about acquiring different things, perspective on stuff, the website is tremendous, jsmindset.com. There's a search bar. You put it in there, and Bill, I don't know how many years' worth of documentation is in there, but those are pretty robust search engines. Yeah, man. So, listeners, we appreciate you, and if you have additional questions, don't hesitate to go to JS Mindset to the search bar and put it in there, because you'll find a treasure trove of stuff just like we've been talking about today. And
make sure
with
that Denny, they should make sure that they are logged in so that they're able to see the gold, the premium content. The reason being, if you search and you're not logged in, you're only going to get the public information. If there's something that we talked about or wrote about and it's premium content, if you're logged in, that will also show up.
Great point. Bill, while you're talking, you got anything else for the team here?
No, I'll just pass it along.
Thanks for all the help. Thanks for passing along those emails, too. David, how about you? Anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I'd like to touch on one thing because you had talked about the whale and, the silver trade. I would like to say, is it a whale or is it a shark? Jim has talked about the sharks eating each other.
Yes.
A long, long time ago, the United States and its leaders went to China to bring China into the capitalist fold. China spent a long, long time studying the United States and capitalism. And I would think that this silver trade is more like a shark as opposed to a whale. If they are accumulating and accumulating and accumulating, and at the same time acting to suppress the price while they accumulate, that would strike me as a shark move, not as a whale move. I've always thought that the reason that Jekyll Isle came along, or the creature from Jekyll Isle came along, is because the central banks were going to pass the baton to the next leader of the world after they destroyed the United States with debt. We've come pretty close to destroying our country with debt. I mean, just look at what our national deficit is at presently. I mean, we're running trillion-dollar deficits. One of the listeners asked, how can there be trillionaires? Well, like Jim said, we know of $22 trillion that's missing. We run $1 trillion a year deficit. If you wanted to set a country up, this has been a perfect game plan for that. And if you were to say our other countries, and let's specifically say China and Russia, and I'm sure there's others, have studied our weaknesses, and there's a lot of weaknesses here. So,
hey, Dave, if we know if the four of us know what the weaknesses are, you could pretty much be guaranteed that there are Russians and Chinese at much higher pay grades than us.
That's for sure. That's what I'm getting at. Yes. Yeah. We can't take anything for granted at this stage of the game. Anything. Because, again, I believe the United States has been set up. And when I say set up, our time at the top of the empire, I believe, is over, and I think the baton is going to get passed to the new leaders of the world. And unfortunately, I don't like what I'm seeing happen. And if you were to look at specifically an article that was posted this week about just what I'm talking about, you would have to ask yourself, imagine a world dominated by China. Jonathan Gass of PTM Images told Gatestone, close your eyes, pretend to wake up in a world controlled by Jinping militarily, economically, politically, and culturally. I'm scared when I do that.
David,
we would
thanks.
certainly be shut down.
Oh, in a heartbeat, and it'll be one switch. All right, Jim. As always, thanks for your wisdom. Thanks for your perspective. And really, you got other things to do, I know, but just giving us an hour a week or an hour and 15 minutes a week is just so appreciated. It's like we've gone to the Oracle, and it's appreciated. You got anything else for us this week, Jim?
That I could go on, but this seminar we've just participated in a group discussion and has hit, in my opinion, every high point that people need to think about, and we'll continue to do that until somebody does think about it.
Well, that's it for us this week, folks. We send you the best, and as always, keep one eye open, even when you're sleeping, because stuff's happening every day. My goodness. We send you our best, and we'll talk to you next week, the same time, same channel.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Have a great weekend.
Enjoy, guys.